Well, we thank Senator Ron Wyden for joining us here in the studio. And Senator, you're a busy man these days. I know that you spent time in Grants Pass today. This is shortly after the Supreme Court obviously made that ruling in a decision regarding homelessness. That decision is going to have an impact on Oregon's homeless population. But the root of the problem still seems to be connected in a large part to housing and to the availability of housing. Do you feel like the federal government needs to take a more aggressive approach on the shortage of housing?
I certainly believe the federal government has to work closely with the private sector and with the state. And next week, I hope that my bipartisan bill, which would build thousands and thousands of houses for low-income folks, that we can get it up on the floor of the United States Senate. The reality is, Democrats probably don't call themselves supply-siders very often. I am a supply-sider on housing. My measure would, and it's bipartisan, would create thousands of units of low-income housing.
And that's looking at it, obviously, from the federal level and from the nation. Here in Oregon, a lot of builders and, housing advocates would say there are certain regulations that stand in the way. There are certain issues that make it difficult. Is that something that, obviously, the state, the county, the cities need to be involved as well? But can the federal government play a role as well?
You bet. The President Biden has picked up on a recommendation I've made that unused federal property should be made available to localities and nonprofit organizations, and that is now part of his housing approach.
You've called for an investigation into Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. President Biden is reportedly considering some changes to the Supreme Court, perhaps what's being reported as term limits, maybe, an ethics code. Would you support these changes?
I certainly think it's time. And with respect to the special counsel, there are serious issues of tax avoidance, in particular, forgiven loans, for example. You have to pay taxes on them. The evidence indicates that Justice Thomas didn't do that. So you bet it's time for some reforms.
Now, of course, there will be critics who say that Democrats are making this argument because the court currently leans conservative. Would they be making the same argument if it was 6-3 liberal justices?
As chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, I'm doing everything by the book. For example, Hunter Biden is facing some legal charges as a result of some tax issues. So the standard has to apply for Democrats and Republicans.
We talked throughout the winter months about wildfire prevention. Obviously, now we are in wildfire season. With fires scattered throughout the state, what is your focus on helping Oregonians now who are dealing with this?
Well, I will tell you, I've had a lot of fire briefings over the years from the Forest Service and the BLM. Yesterday was really eye-opening. They said, basically, they felt that they were in a war, and they used that word specifically. And it was a war to deal with all of this dead and dying brush and material that's on the forest floor. Because when we have a lightning strike or somebody drops a match, all of a sudden you can have an inferno on your hands. And these fires are not your grandfather's fires. They're bigger, they're hotter, they're more powerful. And I made it clear to all the folks in the agencies that I was going to champion the cause of getting them some more support to clean out that dead and dying material on the forest floor.
You sent a letter recently to the Department of Veterans Affairs in May expressing concern for some of the issues plaguing the Roseburg VA. Have you seen any improvements? This was just in May, but have you seen any improvements, and what more would you like to see done?
We're concerned about the staffing issues, particularly understaffing. We're concerned about the medical records, and I'm particularly troubled because Douglas County has so many vets. They're older. These are folks that have served our country with such dignity and value. I want to make sure that they get better care.
This seems to be, every time I'm in Douglas County speaking with people there, this is one of the first issues that gets brought up to me.
It is the first, because these are our friends, these are our parents, these are our grandparents, and we can do better by them.
Have you changed your opinion on President Biden's candidacy? Should he consider stepping down?
Well, first of all, I wish the president a quick recovery. We know he's dealing with COVID, and I've made it clear that the top priority has got to be defeating Donald Trump. Now, President Biden has access to resources, polling, and the like, and my hope is that he'll listen to people who are expert in those areas so that we can figure out a way to make sure that the bottom line is defeating Donald Trump.
Do you feel he is the best Democratic candidate to defeat Donald Trump?
Well, first of all, this is his choice. You know, he has won the delegates, and I've made it clear that he should do anything and everything to make sure that we defeat Donald Trump.
And the idea, obviously, you're a Democrat, you're going to support the Democratic candidate, but Donald Trump this is a rare election where we have a former president running against a current president. So you've served under both of these gentlemen. You know, your experience serving under Donald Trump, if that were to happen again, what did you learn from that first presidency?
First of all, we know he's going to turn back the clock with respect to health care for women. I think that women ought to be making their own choices and not government and not Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. They'd be turning back the clock. We know that they're going to give tax breaks to billionaires. I think there was a reason that Oregonians voted to fire Donald Trump in 2020. And everything I can pick up is we don't want to rehire him in 2024.
And so you aren't personally in conversations with President Biden about his candidacy?
Well, right before we left, we met with the top people at the White House. So they know that my position is, I made that very clear, that the president and everyone around him should be doing everything possible to defeat Donald Trump.
What else is on your agenda here in Oregon?
Well, we're focused on a lot of issues like prescription drug costs. That's a huge issue for seniors. A whole host of small business issues. Next week, my hope is that the Senate will vote on my legislation to go back to making sure that research and development costs are paid for our small businesses. Those are the kinds of issues I'm zeroed in on.
As we get closer to election season, you've been through this before, presidential election. Do things change in Washington? Does it feel different?
Well, we know that elections are coming up, but I always think that the best politics is good policy, and that's what we've been talking about here.
Well, we appreciate you stopping by and appreciate all you're doing here in Oregon. Thank you so much, Senator Wyden.
Thanks for having me.